Buongiorno a tutti. So today we are discussing the future of the European Union, and in particular the future of European fiscal rules. We are together with two important guests. So we are with Lorenzo Codogno, who is a visiting professor at the London School of Economics and former member of the Italian Ministry of Economy and Finance. And we are here with Roel Beetsma, who is a member of the European Fiscal Board and professor at the University of Amsterdam. Before starting, let me pay tribute to an economist who left us yesterday, Alberto Alesina, who was so influential in our debate on the EU economy. And in his name, we should start discussing this important thing. So today we are living in interesting times for the future of the European Union. There is a big debate going on, and which debate regards the evolution of the governance of the Economic and Monetary Union, and which include the topic of European fiscal rules. So I would like to discuss with you what is the importance of the European fiscal rules, why they need to be reformed, and what we expect in the future. So let's start with Lorenzo, who was and is still now an observer, keen observer of these topics. And we would like to have an introduction on this topic and see which are the foreseeable future of this.
Okay, so thank you very much for this introduction and for the question. Let me kickstart by saying that, in my view, fiscal rules are a way to protect citizens from politicians, effectively. So, in a way, it is a framework that should guide the decision-making, and it should be kind of backstage kind of scenario that within which you take decisions in order to maintain sustainability over the long run, and in order to perform policies that are consistent with sound budgeting performance. So I think again it's a way to translate common sense and the behavior of the good father of a family, so to speak, into some rules that are binding and are defined to inform a behavior within the EU and the Eurozone.
Yes, so this is a good way to introduce fiscal rules and the necessity to have in place fiscal rules. And we should note that in the European Union, and especially in the Euro area, we live together with different countries with different traditions. So having in place rules is a way to also to maintain consistency in respect of such rules by all member states. While I would like to discuss with Roel, who is part of the European Fiscal Board, a European perspective of this. So we experienced a debate on European fiscal rules and something went wrong. So could you please tell us what happened and how can we fix it?
Well, you see, this is thank you for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here. This is a very difficult question, obviously, on how to fix it. I mean, the current fiscal framework emerged in the 90s, and it is based also on parameters of the 90s, growth rates of the 90s, inflation rates of the 90s. But a lot has changed since then. And when I look at how has the fiscal framework functioned, then, and I think this is not disputed by anybody, it has not functioned perfectly. It has functioned imperfectly, but it has played a role, and it has had a diminishing effect on fiscal profligacy. That I'm convinced of. So it has had a role, but it has not played a perfect role. And we see that over time, things have changed. The rules, they did not function that well, so they have been kind of, they have been revised. And along the way, they have been made more complicated. And also, the application has become less transparent, and with more flexibility, that is not always that transparent. So I think And this has led to, in a way, to conflicts between countries. I mean, on the one hand, there is like my own country, the Netherlands, who wants to have very strict application of the rules. And on the other hand, there are countries that have been making use of the flexibility in the system. And you see, I think that we need to have a system, and I mean, we don't have a silver bullet, but I think we need to have a system that is simpler, that is, more targeted to what is, I mean, what are the rules for? The rules are for guaranteeing sustainability. So, as the European Fiscal Board, we have made some advice on how these rules could be how they could be changed. So to have a long run debt target or debt ceiling, to focus more on spending growth, but also to have what we call a general escape clause. So not have, like we now have, like very complicated assessments of by the European Commission of country situation in order to potentially apply some flexibility. But we plead in favor of a so-called general escape clause, and the general escape clause would be monitored by independent experts, which could be within the Commission if you have a separation between the Commission experts at the political level. And based on analysis, one could have. So if we think that the situation is such that the general escape clause should be activated, then there should be an independent analysis and there should be an independent advice. So we would. So one of the problems with the current set of rules is that we have been trying to write what we call, as economists, a complete contract. Try to incorporate all kinds of eventualities in the rules, but this is impossible. So what we propose is to not do this anymore, but to have what we call the general escape clause, but it would be monitored through independent expertise. And it's different from the current so-called general escape clause that has been activated, but is still within the the current setup of the Stability and Growth Pact.
Yes, thank you very much for this introduction on the debate which is ongoing here. And I think we need a reform of the rules to ensure the credibility of the rules themselves, because if in any kind of situation we need to suspend the rules lose their credibility. So, but you all know very well that those rules were not welcomed by member states because they see rules as constraints and not as an opportunity to increase the quality of budgetary policy. So I would like to ask you how we can make those rules more friendly, both for politicians and for the public opinion.
Is it for me?
Yes, yeah, for all of you.
Okay, let me kickstart. So I think rules are not set in stone, so to speak. So and the economics is not set in stone as well. I mean, it's a social science, so we need to change the way the science and the economics behaves and provides guidance depending on the situation. And given the shock that the economies are suffering right now, clearly you have to change the rules. You have to adapt the rules for the new situation. And I think the European Fiscal Board, for instance, has done a wonderful job in trying to make proposals how to change the rules, how to adapt the rules to a new situation. I think this current situation is I mean, if I listen at the debate in Italy, sometimes it looks like the rules have been scrapped altogether, which is not true. They have been suspended, and that is fully consistent with the rule because there was an escape clause. I think the rules are important to guide behavior, to guide policy making, and will remain important in the future. It's just they need to be adapted to the different situations. For instance, now, given the shock that the economies have gone through, I would expect for a while at least an increase in precautionary savings and probably less investment by companies because of the situation. So inevitably, there would be a bigger role for the state for a while again. So rules to some extent need to accommodate the need for somewhat higher government investment for maybe a few years in order to compensate for lack of private demand and in order to enhance potential growth in the future. That is already embedded in the rules to some extent already today. And maybe this aspect needs to be strengthened in the future. So again, rules are not straitjackets. Rules are guidelines that allow policymakers to behave within what is perceived to be good behavior according to the situation and the overall framework of the economy.
Yes, thank you, Lorenzo. This was very, very clear. So, Roel, what's your take on this?
So I completely agree with what Lorenzo is saying, and I think that rules that are purely perceived as constraints and that are not seen as making economic sense, they are bound to be neglected or they are bound to be abolished. So, given the current situation, I mean, there was quite a lot wrong with the rules, before the COVID crisis, but the current crisis, makes it even more clear. And I think that I see a few priorities. We saw that after the previous crisis, we saw a big drop in public investment, especially in Italy, in Portugal, when you compare to, say, the period like before 2008. And my fear is that this will happen again, because it is politically, it's easiest to cut public investment or more generally growth-friendly investment, because the proceeds of this are, of course, you see them only in the long run. So this is my big fear that, and I think Lorenzo was also alluding to that. This is my fear that this is what will happen, with very damaging consequences for the longer run. So the current rules, they have like an investment clause and structural reform clause, but these can only be invoked under special conditions. So I think priority is that, okay, first there is the healthcare crisis, and rightly the general escape clause was invoked, although countries will still be individually judged on on the fiscal behavior. So the health expenditures, that's the first priority. But then, how are we going to rebuild? How are we going to emerge from this crisis? And here we need to have a sufficiently forward-looking perspective. So I think that, we had the 60% debt ceiling, but I think we can all agree that that is not, so many countries, that will not be reached within the foreseeable future. So what we need is to have, on the one hand, sensible fiscal behavior in terms of, looking at the long term, having incentives for public investment, especially at the European level, having incentives for investment that has cross-border spillovers. And then I'm thinking of, for example, transnational, transportation networks, digital investments in digital economy. And on the other hand, of course, we need to make sure that there will not be kind of a financial crisis in the sense that governments will not be able to service their debt. So we need to have Also, we need to have a commitment to the restoration of the public finances, but in a very gradual way. And I think that, what's most important is the commitment, is a visible commitment, more than what is the level of the public debt per se. So these are, in my view, the priorities.
Yes, this was very clear, Roel. Thank you. So I would like to introduce another topic in our discussion, because Europe is not only about rules. It's also about a project that is currently evolving, the so-called process of European integration. And the current debate is also focused on the idea of creating an embryo of fiscal union, of European fiscal union, starting with some specific points which are in the current debate: safe assets, the completion of banking union, and we are now discussing in the EU the recovery fund, which is a very interesting proposal, and which saw an important debate in these days, whether to create it with loans or grants, how to finance them, in which time frame, which instrument to use to implement this recovery fund. So I would like to touch 2 points on this. First, which is your view on the future of the European Union in terms of fiscal union, and second, which role can rules play in the establishment of these new instruments of fiscal union or coordination? So
first, Lorenzo, or
should I? Okay. Well, I think, as you said, there is a big debate right now on the recovery fund and the policy response to the pandemic. I think we have to distinguish 2 aspects. One is the way to increase resilience and the way to increase macroeconomic shock absorption capacity for the EU and the Eurozone. And in my view, and I have written this before the crisis, we need a safe asset and we need centralized fiscal capacity. And there is a way to design that without increasing mutualization, without increasing risk sharing. So I think that there is a way to increase resilience in the EU and the Eurozone without entering into very difficult debates about mutualization. Having said that, this is clearly a transition phase, and the ultimate goal should be full economic and political integration. But we know that there are different perceptions and different sensitivities across Europe. So I think we need to proceed in a way that is respecting fully democratic principles, which effectively means, given the current situation, opening up a big debate. As you know, there is the intention now to open up a conference sometimes next year to discuss the future of Europe. And inevitably, I think there will have to be some treaty changes, because I think with this crisis, we have probably reached the limit of what can be achieved and can be delivered within the current framework. So I think there's a need to make a step in the direction of integration. And we were discussing before about the role of public investment, but keep in mind that the main objective of policy should be to stimulate private investment. And what is the best way to stimulate private investment than that speeding up integration? I mean, let's put this way. If you are a company and you are coming out of such a big shock as the one all the economies are under, and but you have uncertainty about the future, what is the best policy to improve the outlook for companies and for investment than to say, listen, we know that we acknowledge that it's now difficult to go immediately towards full economic and political integration, but we put on on a piece of paper and we commit to a roadmap, which might lead in maybe 20 or 30 years or whatever into full economic and political integration. I mean, if you say something like this and you have a strong commitment by all governments to move in that direction, what is going to happen? It's going to happen that companies will start investing immediately because they want to prepare, they want to be the first movers in this kind of process. So it would actually open up a season of enhanced economic growth. So I think this is the single most unused opportunity that Europe has to boost growth, potential growth, and hasn't been used. So I think it would be very much desirable, in my view, to have a clear roadmap for the future. And in order to go for it, inevitably you have to have a political clarification among countries, and you have to have a fully democratic process to move in that direction. Which clearly is not possible in an emergency. So in an emergency, the best you can do is to fix the situation as good as you can. You know, it's an emergency situation. You have to use the tools that you have available at the moment, and the tools that are available are not ideal, but you have to live with them.
Yes, I personally tend to agree with what you just said. So over the years, Europe evolved in times of crisis. This was the functionalist paradigm. So I completely agree that we need a switch of paradigm and maybe move towards more federal kind of paradigm. We can discuss this a bit more later. So Roel, what's your take on what Lorenzo just said?
I completely agree with what Lorenzo said. And I think if we go back to 92, or, I mean, the anticipation of 92, that was, of course, a big boost, and that was the European single market. And now we see, unfortunately, as a result of what is happening now, we see that, the competition rules have effectively been abandoned for the time being. And I hope that, people have pointed out that, countries with deep pockets have, of course, more possibilities to support their companies. My hope is that this crisis will kind of make us, after the fallout, after the dust has fallen, that we will rethink the European project, and we start to be serious about how to move forward. And that means on the single market all kinds of, doing business in other countries is difficult for all kinds of reasons. So we should work on the integration, the energy market. Much of the services is still segmented. And people, and this should be sold to the general public, because people tend to be more skeptical about Europe, but they don't realize the benefits. And so the fact that you have your mobile telephone and you can telephone, you can call someone from abroad against a very low cost. People don't realize that is the consequence of the single market. So I think this has to be solved. Politically, it is not easy, because, and that was before the crisis, the debate was stuck, because there are countries that, they want to have what we call risk reduction, say the Netherlands, Germany, and there are countries that want to have risk sharing, say Italy, France. And the debate was stuck. There is this excellent CEPR insight by German and French economists, which, gives, takes a very reasonable positions on how we can go forward. And I think both sides of the debate have to, they have to accept the arguments of the other, and we have to have a deal. We have to have a deal between both sides of the debate. So I think that I agree. If we have a roadmap, and the roadmap reflects the concerns and the wishes of both sides, then maybe we can go forward. And the importance of a roadmap is, and I remember, when for EMU and 99, the preparations were made long in advance, and the agreements were made 10 years in advance. And if we have a roadmap that is in a way does not demand too much at each moment, but takes enough time, say 20, 30 years, then also the current governments, they realize that controversial issues that may be controversial now or that may not be acceptable for them now, 20 years from now they will not be in government anymore, and so they can take kind of more a distant view. And so, what should be in this roadmap? I think a true completion of the single market. There should be probably in steps, in terms of budgetary integration. The European Fiscal Board has long argued in favor of a central fiscal capacity. So we could set up a central fiscal capacity, and then over time, when economies converge more towards each other, we could have a true European budget. That means that the EU would have its own revenue resources, and it would make its own, expenditures on public goods, on transfers. So, but I agree, we should have a roadmap. The roadmap should be, in a way, acceptable. So it should probably not move in too drastic steps, but it should have a clear endpoint.
Yes, thank you, Roel. This was very clear. And I would like to mention for our audience that the study you were mentioning is the study of Agnes Benassi-Querré et al., published in 2018. So you can find it easily online for free. Just a final point, because we are approaching our deadline. I would like to comment with you the debate that we experienced in this day, because I think it's very important to have here in this conversation an Italian and a Dutch. Because over the last days, the debate between our countries were very fierce. So on one hand, there was our prime minister who said in a press release that we need the Eurobonds, and without Eurobonds and with the ESM, we are going to leave the Eurozone, which didn't happen, of course. And on the other hand, we had Mark Rutte, who pledged to a truck driver to never give money to Italy, which I think to some extent did not happen as well. So both of them will want to be right. So I would like to comment with you, how do you see this debate going on? Because you just replied on how this can be resolved, but how do you judge this debate? Can we come out of this debate and get rid of this, I think, stupid politicization of European things?
Should I go first as well? Sorry, so you have the last word. So, sorry, Roel. Very briefly, I think, as I said before, the tools are not ready to move into an additional step of integration. So you need to work with the tools that are available right now. And I think the Commission and the European institutions have already done quite a significant effort to try to put together a package which is helpful for countries. Now, clearly, if you talk to some Dutch politicians, they don't want to have any kind of transfers, which is not going to happen. I mean, there will be some transfer, there will be some grants for countries that suffer the most. And if you talk about some Italian politicians, they look for pennies from heaven, basically. They want to have free money to spend, and which is not going to happen as well. So I think you have to find a middle way, which is probably a combination of loans and grants that will allow Europe to move forward and to go through this difficult period, and then reopen again another big debate in the future on how to proceed in a fully democratic way towards the next step.
Yeah, so the way I see it is that much of what is being said by politicians in Italy and in the Netherlands is also for domestic consumption. And I think that in the end, and we already see that there is, and I think this is also the likely outcome, that there will be a combination. So in the Commission proposal, that is the Commission plan that I think will become due this Wednesday, there will probably be a mixture of loans and grants. But what has preceded it, I think, is a combination of two things. One is like taking position, and the other is also to to appeal to the domestic public. And I think, I mean, both countries suffer to some extent from, well, not to some extent, but suffer to a large extent, I think, from pressure from populists. And so, you have to be, critical. And I think that, the populists, of course, they thrive on Euroscepticism. And so I can see that, the politicians who are at the negotiating table, they also feel the populists in the back. And but in the end, I think the outcomes will be something that is something that is more reasonable than the initial positions. And I think I'm happy that that will be the case, because we have to go forward with each other. Let's see what the Commission plan looks like. And yeah.
Okay, so I think we are ended our time. So I would like to thank you both for your time, and I think we had a very, very good conversation that tries to put together the positions that we carry on with ourselves. And I think that this could be a starting point to find a compromise between different political views, but without including everyone, because some politicians in national states really don't want to pursue in this way. So I think we should be clear in having a view of cooperation and for the development of Europe, bringing together different ideas constructively and with the purpose of creating a more resilient and powerful Europe in the future, which I think is ultimately also in the interest of nation states themselves. So I think we could go to this conclusion. And let me thank again Lorenzo and Roel for joining us. And I'm wishing to all our audience a good day. And thanks for listening to us. Arrivederci.
Thank you.
Thank you.